Jarvis, drop my needle.
Hello, this is the hardcore legend Mick Foley, and if you are interested in listening to idiots, you came to the right place. Have a nice day.
Woo! That's an attention getter.
He's a very strange young man.
He's an idiot.
What we're dealing with here is a complete lack of respect for the law.
Oh my God, he's an idiot.
You know, of course, that you're out of your jurisdiction.
Personally, I think you're an idiot.
But that's the evidence in the car.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Always like to keep my audience riveted.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, friends and fiends, and welcome to Free Range Idiocy, the podcast about everything, but mostly just the stuff we like. In case you haven't noticed, there's a whole lot of opinions about Star Wars. Whether it's which movie is best, which one is the worst, how much the streaming shows are liked and disliked, whether or not Disney has ruined Star Wars, or just to name a few. Well, we might not be breaking new ground with this one, but at least we're taking a different angle on the idiocy. We're going to discuss whether the prequel trilogy should have actually been a duology in this episode 209. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I am your Uncle Todd, and with me, as is always, is the man who reads the opening scrolls from the beginning of Star Wars movies as a form of meditation. He has been my partner in idiocy for over 2 decades and is able to fart the Imperial March on command. I give you the man they call Tim.
Are you ready? You think you can tell us what to do? You think you can tell us what to wear? You think that you're better? Well, you better get ready. Bow to the masters. Break it down.
Okay, that's all we need. That's all the Connecticut
Degenerate
Yankee.
into something full. We just got tired of doing what you told us to do. That's the brakes, boy. Yeah. That's the brakes, little man. Break it down. Greetings and salutations, my friend. How are you? Got to put a little stank on the breaking down. You know what I mean?
I feel like I had an ice pick just go through my sphincter. I'm not sure that's the effect you were going for. The weird thing is doing that song as a Walken-esque. Honestly, it's not that far off from the intro of the song.
It's not. I know. Isn't that funny?
And yeah, that band, Connecticut Yankee, named after the Connecticut nuclear station.
A little bit.
I liked it, sir.
Thank you.
I'm doing well, and how are you, sir, on this Free Range Idiocy Friday?
I'm feeling good. I'm ready for a little idiot's court, my friend. Ready for a little idiot's court as we adjudicate. Oh, we got a Buford in the works. Ladies and gentlemen, be ready.
Ooh, the Spindrift actually worked pretty well.
Nice.
As a substitute.
Got some bubbly.
Yeah. Actually, there's less bubbly in this. Like the Spindrift is only lightly carbonated as opposed to kind of the Polar Seltzer, full on. But yes, we are going to do a little idiot's court. We're going to talk about the prequel trilogies, and we will state our cases, and we'll see
this was
how
an
they hold
offshoot.
together.
This was an offshoot of our Movies of 2005 episode.
It was.
That was a few weeks ago, where we started to get into a bit of a debate and decided to pump the brakes on this one. We thought we could maybe get the services of one Jimmy Dice, but we'll have to table that for another time. But just wanted to kind of move into a different episode, this discussion around the prequel trilogy of Star Wars and whether or not there could have been one less movie. I am taking the side that I think the prequels could have been better served as a duology, and Uncle Todd is looking for a refined version of the trilogy, but a trilogy nonetheless.
Which means we are heading to Idiot's Court, ladies and gentlemen.
Indeed. Oh, there we go. Oh, we got some music. Yes, sir. Indeed. Oh, let the funk play. Come on.
It takes a couple seconds to get going, but once it does.
Feel it. Feel the funk and appreciate it.
Yeah, so the man they call Tim here. Oh, that freaking guitar gets me every time. Oh. So we've got a couple of things here going on. You feel that basically like Phantom Menace could have been just done away with entirely, or are you saying compress it all into 2? Listen to that dude on the freaking congas there.
I am not necessarily saying get a... Oh, jeez, Louise. It feels wrong to even talk during this. Good Lord.
Dude, TV show goes way harder than it has any business doing.
So good, so good.
And I think this goes for like 10 minutes.
Jeez, I didn't realize we had like the, Star Wars laser sound going on here. Good Lord, look at that. We're mostly into the Star Wars thing. Judge Wapner like firing a phaser or something? What the hell?
Not sure we ever got this deep into the song.
I don't think we have. My goodness.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we're coming back hard with this one. Come on, we're going to feel it.
Oh, there we go. Oh, feel the conga. Conga drums going, baby. Woo.
All right. Hang on a second. I got to turn this off because we'll be here all night.
Ladies and gentlemen, Idiot's Court is the
now in session.
Oh my God, I guess it is in session. Oh my goodness, that theme, man, that rocks. That rocks.
So here, I'll. Do you want to lay out your case first, or do you want to lay out? You want me to go first?
Well, I just want to bring it back to what started all. We were talking about Revenge of the Sith from 2005, and we got talking about kind of the build up to that movie, and you had a couple of really interesting points. I was starting to go down the road of the less conventional thought of did we even need 3 movies? And it's not to say, I mean, I guess in a way I am saying cut Phantom Menace, but I want to kind of talk through my thought process on it. So I could go first. Do you want to
go right ahead?
Start things off? Or okay. So my contention is that when I look back at and this stood out to me, I'm trying to remember. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. I think it was last year. I saw Phantom Menace. When did Phantom Menace come out? 99?
99, yeah.
So we were at the 25-year point. I think that's why it was.
Yeah, it would have been 24, right?
25. Yeah, 2024 would have been 25 years. And so I remember going to see it with my family, but I remember how thin the movie
and they still want to have something to do with you. That's remarkable.
They do. I did tell them the story about how I dragged your sorry ass to the movie theater at a midnight showing.
Live in infamy.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, it was the first bits of original Star Wars content to be out there in the general public in circa 1999.
Nice to throw in a Ron White.
Hey, I
pull there. I
learned from the best. Learned from the best. Public.
I didn't want to be in public. I wanted to be drunk in a bar. They threw me into public.
So I am going to go with the more controversial stance and say that I think we could compress the prequels from a trilogy into a duology, meaning 2 movies.
Point of order, sir.
Yes, sir.
I wouldn't necessarily go with controversial. I would go with unconventional because...
Well, it could be controversial to some fans if they love Phantom Menace.
True. Those poor souls.
I think I might be ruffling, for example, some scruffy feathers as well.
Well, yeah, but then there's also those revisionist history bastards out there who are like every single one of the post-school trilogies. They're like, oh, Phantom Menace was better than this. Like, no, it wasn't. Yeah. You've been crapping all over that movie for 2 decades, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh no, it's much better. Like, shut up. Yeah. Jeez. Anyways,
but here's my contention that when I look back at Phantom Menace, and I don't mean to crap all over it, but just hear me out. I struggle to find the purpose of the movie as it serves the story, and I give exhibits A through F. I think So in this movie, we have, of course, the discovery of Anakin. We have the establishment of midi-chlorians, which is a highly controversial topic to some fans. Why do we need to quantify the Force? Now the Force is being over-explained to us. And I also want to state, as I go through my argument here, that, using as an exhibit Andor season 2, and what we talked about there around the genius and the artistry of telling a very tight story without having to explain everything can be done, and can be done very well. And in Phantom Menace, we have the midichlorians, we have Anakin, we use the pod race to prove that Anakin is the Force user that he is supposed to be, to establish him as the chosen one, or so they think. It is, a story that shows Palpatine going from being a senator to a chancellor. It introduces the concept of Darth Maul and then kills him off in one fell swoop. And it introduces Qui-Gon as a rogue Jedi Master. Now, my contention is that I think a story could be told in 2 movies where in the first movie, you focus on Anakin not as a boy, but rather as a teen or a young adult in the Jedi Academy who is discovered to have skill that is beyond expectation for someone of his age. And in essence, you start to have the story that you see in Phantom Menace where they discover this prodigy. And there is a backstory. I'm not going to go into great detail because I haven't sat down and really thought it all out, but you could have a backstory where you get to a place of, could this be this, chosen one? Again, the whole idea of the chosen one feels very Matrixy to me, first of all, and it was kind of a weird timing thing because the Matrix came out the same time Phantom Menace did. So it's not like one influenced the other. They were both kind of like coming out in tandem.
Yeah, but it's also a well-worn story trope. So
it is. Yeah. But it seems to me you could have Anakin functioning as either a older teen or a young adult who is showing, just a above normal skill level and ability to be, functioning as a potential Jedi. And from there, you can launch into some similar themes of, establishing a relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm not saying, Qui-Gon was a wasted relationship in Phantom Menace, but at the end of the day, and again, Filoni does a great job of laying out how, Qui-Gon was way ahead of the Jedi and what that all kind of led to across the 6 movies, the prequels and the original trilogy. But I do feel like when you think about the purpose and the why behind it all, the focus needs to be on Obi-Wan. And really my contention is the trilogy is misplaced because, like any other good story that climaxes, your climax happens in that 3rd movie. You're building up to the heel turn, really, in wrestling parlance. You're building up to this idea that Anakin was this, hero for good who, falls and turns to the dark side and becomes this villain that he never thought he would become. And I don't know that you need that first movie to establish that. I think if you had a movie that lays out, Anakin as someone special, Anakin is someone who establishes a relationship with Obi-Wan, they become close. We see the connection of Obi-Wan as Jedi Master to Anakin's Padawan, and we understand that, over time they become a formidable duo. We also at the same time see the establishment of Palpatine and his rise to Chancellor. So again, when we say I want to get rid of Phantom Menace, there's elements of Phantom Menace we keep in some cases. I think showing Palpatine's rise from Senator to Chancellor in the first movie makes sense. We also have the establishment of the emergency powers at the same time. So it's kind of like an acceleration to what we see in Attack of the Clones. We also see, and this is where I think this can be very organic. If Anakin is a student in the Jedi Academy, that we have him start to interact with a young senator, Padme, and there is a burgeoning romance that can start there because of the natural aspect of the two of them being in Coruscant and happening. Maybe there are events that push the two of them together.
Well,
where
she is a lady,
She's a lady. But we can start establishing a relationship there. This all feels very reasonable to do in a single movie. And then we have some, overall story that's being told where, again, Anakin and Obi-Wan forge their bond. Anakin forges a bond with Padme. And by the end of that first movie, we see the beginning of the Clone Wars.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. So, which, when you think about Attack of the Clones, that's what essentially happens. Anakin is a teenager. Anakin is forging a romance with Padme. And in essence, Chancellor Palpatine, who has been in power for 10 years at this point, then creates or manufactures the argument for emergency powers, which allows him to then start the Clone Wars. Now, do we need to go through the entire story of how the clones are created and where they come from and all of that? I don't know. And this is where I kind of invoke the Tony Gilroy storytelling mechanism of, is it super important that we tell certain aspects of the story around where the clones come from? I think in some ways there was some fan service there. I think in some ways it was important to tell that. But for this first movie, I don't know, I don't have everything laid out precisely. I just simply am making the statement that in the first movie, you can establish a lot of the same initial story threads of Anakin and his power and his relationships. Maybe you can weave in there the clone aspect as well, but ultimately at the end of the movie, you are starting the Clone Wars. The key here is we don't see the Clone Wars have to play out. We jump into, in some ways, Revenge of the Sith as the second movie. And the second movie is really, or the second story is focused on, Anakin and Padme have grown closer together over the span of years that have happened with the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan and Anakin have obviously grown closer as well. And Chancellor Palpatine has grown in power. And we essentially see a lot of the same events. So I guess what I'm advocating for is we have a movie that sets a different origin story for Anakin, but we have very much a similar story of Revenge of the Sith. Now, I'm not saying it's exactly the same as Revenge of the Sith, but a lot of the same themes play out. We see Palpatine declare himself emperor. We see Anakin's, fall because he is seduced by Palpatine to fall to the dark side. Is it the same argument, about saving Padme? I don't know. That could still be a thread that could still exist. But when I thought of it this way the other day, it made a lot of sense to me, because I look at the first movie and it just feels like there's a lot of fat that you can trim. Now, do we miss Darth Maul? Do we? Would it be nice to have a Darth Maul character as part of this duology? Sure.
You mean for all 3.5 minutes he's on screen?
Well, fair enough. I mean, but you make my point, right? I mean, he's on the screen for a very short period of time, and yet still he was a very visually engaging, a very interesting villain, a very, to me, when I first saw it, and I might be in the minority, I looked at him as, holy crap, Lucas has somehow created another. I don't want to say he's the same as Vader, but he was very close to him in terms of visual. You know what I mean? Like, Vader became Vader because of the visual of this dark, masked, cloaked individual who you didn't know who he was, but he was intimidating. And Maul was intimidating. Maul was a pit bull. And it was really interesting to see how Lucas was able to recreate that in the modern era of the 90s and have him be a compelling character. The problem is he didn't make any freaking character story for him and killed him off before he could actually use him in a very interesting way.
Yeah, and to make it even worse, like they leveraged Maul so much in the marketing for that movie.
Yes.
It was so disappointing to only see him
Yes.
for I forget what the exact count screen time count is, but I don't think it made 5 minutes.
Mm-mm.
I mean even with the lightsaber battle, like
No.
I think that he was on the screen. If it was more than 5 minutes, it definitely didn't make 10. And yet you would have thought,
Yeah.
watching the trailers, watching the marketing, all of that stuff, you would have thought like, oh my gosh, Maul is going to be all up in this piece. And he wasn't. And I think that was one of my big complaints is like, dude, the bad guy is like barely in this flick.
Yeah.
What the hell gives? Like he looks cool, but that's not enough. So yeah, I would give us credit there, but that the flip side of that is like they also piss people off by that a lot.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No doubt. So kind of in my vision, no midichlorians. It was just a story about Anakin, his exceptional ability, the way the Jedi deal with that. Now there's an aspect of Anakin having a relationship with Palpatine. We could, certainly weave that in across the two movies. So my contention is you can accomplish a lot of the same things that you accomplish across 3 movies and 2. And you get rid of the idea of, Anakin as a kid. You get rid of the ideas, what's not important to me. And again, this is where I invoke the, kind of what I'll call the Gilroy storytelling method. It's not germane to the story that Shmi is, like a Mary, from the Bible character, where she has this immaculate conception. As a fan, I don't care.
Yeah.
All I care about is Anakin is an exceptional Jedi. He has more power than normal Jedi or normal students have.
Mm-hmm.
And do I give a rat's crap about why he gets it? You know what I mean? Like whether it's this way or that way. The fact is he has it.
Yes.
And so how do the Jedi deal with that? How does Palpatine deal with that? That's the thing that's important.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about where he comes from. And I know some of his fall is steeped in the idea that he goes back to find his mom because he's feeling whatever. And, she's been taken by the Sand People and he slaughters an entire village. There are other ways that we can get to the unstable nature of who he is without having to incorporate all of that. And so that's my only point. And and what it ends up doing is you end up losing the over explanation of the Force and some of this excess that you see in Phantom Menace. You cut some of what we don't really need in Attack of the Clones. And I think you tell a much tighter story that establishes the same principles and the same, in very much the same way, the arcs that exist, but just in a smaller and tighter timeline. And the other thing I'll invoke here too is what we hear about coming. We haven't seen this yet, and so I'm kind of, in a way, making a little bit of a hollow argument here. But if Ahsoka season 2 is going to be, the establishment of Grand Admiral Thrawn as the villain and antagonist that we all, those of us who have read the books believe he's going to be, they can use a season to do that. And then the Filoni movie makes a whole lot more sense because now you've established him as this nasty bad guy that needs to be done away with. And now the heroes come together in the movie to deal with him. Mm-hmm. And so, and again, they're doing that in essentially 2 steps. One is season 2 and the other is the movie. So with all of that, that's my argument. I think as much as I love Star Wars, as much as I've seen those movies a bunch of times, and I've been, back when they came out, I was a fan of Phantom Menace. I was a fan of Attack of the Clones. Looking back in retrospect and thinking, and especially through the lens of Andor, where you see what focused storytelling can accomplish, I think there's a way to shrink it down and to get to the heart of the story, which is Anakin starts out as a good person with exceptional power. He falls because he is confused or he allows things to take priority in his life that cause him to go in a bad direction, and he makes bad choices. And because of that, he becomes the ultimate villain, as much as he was trying not to. And I think you can still get there and hit all the notes that Revenge of the Sith hits, and in some ways combining what you do in Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, but in a different form. So that is my case, sir. What say you?
Well, let me retort a bit to what you said, because I like the idea of the way you kind of start off that first movie, and you make Anakin, you make him a little bit older, and you start doing a lot of that character development a little bit further on in his story. I think that's an interesting way to go about it. And it's also funny because in doing a little bit of research here, like originally Lucas had wanted Anakin to be like 12, I think, in the Phantom Menace, and made him 9 to kind of get more of a bright-eyed, young kid in the mix. Because I would agree with that. I think that there is a lot more character development that's going to happen there, and a lot less gawking. Like, oh, wasn't he cute? Wasn't Darth Vader cute? I like that idea. And I think that you actually teased out something that I feel like, let me see if I can, the whole, like, don't explain everything, the Gilroy method that you're talking about.
Yeah.
The problem here is, but Lucas can't help himself. That's the thing. And as I've watched,
can you hold on one second? I apologize. Yeah. I need to go help with something. So just give me 1 second.
No worries, dude.
Our garage, the remote to our garage is in our car in the garage, and we can't open the garage. So I need to go check on that. So give me 1 second.
Many months later.
Well, how'd that go?
Sorry about that.
How you doing?
We figured it out. So the problem is the keypad we have for our garage door opener, one of the numbers, which is crucial to the overall combo, is stuck.
Oh.
Or doesn't, connect when you press it. And we also lost we used to have 2 garage door openers. I lost one of them when I was working in, we had to turn in, like I had a leased car, so I had to turn it in every so often. I left one of the garage door openers in the car, and we lost it.
Yeah.
And so we only have one left. And so Ken just used it for the car that, goes in the garage. And so it was in the car in the garage. And so I had to remember, like, we haven't used the keypad in a while, especially when for some reason, when it gets like really cold, like in winter, it doesn't work at all. So we just don't use the keypad. We just use the opener. And so when you have the opener in the garage, it presents a problem. So that was the issue.
So my one question here, and sir, I don't mean to poke the bear, as it were, but
yes,
as the grand poobah of the HOA, wouldn't you be the person in charge of getting all them replaced? Or at least yours.
It's not an HOA thing. It is a homeowner thing.
Well, in that case, wouldn't you also be the one in charge of getting that replaced?
It would. Except I keep getting it to work, so then I don't think I need to replace it.
Intermittently. Sir, the thing is, like, I live most of my life with an inferiority complex. But
there's brief flashes where I make you feel very superior, don't I?
No, it's moments when I just feel like I'm dead even. And, to me, that is such a bucket of win I can't even explain to you, where I'm just like, you know what? We're on an even playing field. I feel good. I feel good. I feel good.
100%.
Oh, right.
I hope you noted the timestamp so you can eliminate all that dead air and
what, the past 15 minutes.
Chicanery.
Yes, I did notice. Yeah. I did notice that.
So you were starting to make your argument. Go ahead.
Yes. So
I'm eating Gouda cheese right now. So
I might actually just leave that little explanation of the whole keypad thing in, because it is quite interesting.
Feel free to take his name out of it, though. So.
Oh, well, you just said it again, so now I've got to bleep it twice. So here's
39 minutes.
Here's what I'm saying. Basically, I like your point where you're saying you don't need to explain everything. However, the problem being, George Lucas just cannot help himself. He loves this universe that he has created, and he wants to explain everything to you. And that's great. I love going back to Empire of Dreams, the excuse me, the incredible documentary that used to be just on like the it originally came with the DVD set that I had of the original trilogy, and that was part of the bonus material. And it's fantastic, and it goes into whole how he he got into the Joseph Campbell, really the mythology and the kind of the shape of myths and the hero's journey and all of this. And he had talked to Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell had once said George Lucas is like the best student he ever had, probably because of how successfully he employed what he learned from Campbell and leveraged that into storytelling and making a boatload of cash. But the side part of that is that when you create a universe, you just want to explain everything. And this was something that I ran into when I was working in the audiobook world for a couple of years, and my least favorite genre was fantasy, because there was so much world building, and you could tell those people that they started writing fantasy primarily because they loved world building, because you could really do it from the ground up, and they would spend so much time world building and explaining to you all the minutia of like, and here's how they draw their water from these wells. And it's like, when is the story going to start? Because we're 120 pages in, and I'm listening to this thing, and I'm listening for errors, but I am also bored out of my skull, because like, you're telling me everything about the trees and the this and that, but is there something I should care about, a character about coming anytime soon? And that's the problem. And this really, honestly, this might be Lucas's fatal flaw in the prequel trilogy, is that he just can't fracking help himself from telling you about everything. And the problem is, the prequel trilogy is supposed to be the story of Anakin Skywalker.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, he just loses track of that in telling you about everything. Like, you lose track of the fact that, oh yeah, we're supposed to be talking about Anakin, and yet we're into tariffs and this and that and the other, and this machination and that machination. It's like, not that it's not important for the overall saga of Star Wars, but you're taking a lot of time to do it. So I do appreciate how you are clipping a lot of that out. Because I did have in my notes here on the outline Uncle Todd's olive branch, where I was willing to concede that you do make a good point, and after listening to your case, I think it only enforces it more. You make a good point. Like, it could have been done effectively as a duology, as 2 movies instead of a trilogy. However, where I think that you are going to lose a lot is you would have to shed a lot of story, and either that or you're going to have 2 very long movies in order to make that work. Because I think that the argument isn't necessarily that, oh, we can condense this down. It's like, no, there's plenty of story. It just it's paced in the worst possible way you could do it. That being said, it was never going to be a duology, because George loves him a trilogy. That's what he loves. And it works. It works. It's 3-act story structure, so it works as well. Yeah.
But I think what I think you're leaning on a lot is George. And I'm not factoring, I mean, I don't mean to say I'm not factoring Lucas into it. I'm just saying, if you take the story at face value of what he's trying to tell in that trilogy, and you have the freedom to now focus it. So I get what you're saying, but you're constraining yourself to Lucas being involved. If you take Lucas out of the picture,
well, then you don't have Star Wars. Well, okay, and I get
you
what
don't
you're
have
saying.
Star Wars because you have Gilroy, you have others who have done very well with Star Wars.
Okay, so you're talking about like if this trilogy was made like now, the prequels were made now.
Well,
because
I
again,
think you have to entertain that, because yeah, Lucas is a limiting factor. Lucas is not his brilliance is in, like you just said, the brilliance is in the hero's journey, the story he's trying to tell. He is not the right person, unfortunately, as I think history has shown, to be the one to make the films, because I think, to your point, he doesn't make very good choices at times. And I think if he were to put it in, I look at Empire Strikes Back. He did not make Empire Strikes Back. He put the movie in the hands of Irwin Kershner, who made a classic of a story off of what Lucas. I mean, Lucas wrote it. Don't get me wrong.
Well, wasn't Lawrence Kasdan a screenwriter on that?
He was, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, Lucas came up with it was story by,
but yes. But what I'm saying is, if you take Lucas out of the picture and just focus on what is the story you're trying to tell. And I'm making this argument because I think the same could be said of, and I'm going to move into a totally different franchise. But when you look at Lord of the Rings and you go to the movies that were, it's Hobbit's Tale, when it's about Bilbo, eventually finding the ring and all of that. Peter Jackson made that into a trilogy. When he was asked later on about it, he's like, I really should have made 2 movies. I tried to turn something into a trilogy that really should have been 2 movies. Because the story wasn't there. He had to really stretch a lot of things out, and he had to kind of force it into a 3-story structure when it really was, 2 stories that could have been told in a much more efficient and compressed format. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with the prequels is I think Lucas, don't get me wrong, Lucas has a compelling story to tell. I think he had to create a lot of crap to get it into 3 movies. And I think The Phantom Menace is the one you have to focus on because while Attack of the Clones doesn't have the great name to it, there is story of significance happening in that movie that I think makes a lot of sense that then leads into Revenge of the Sith, which out of the 3, I think you and I both agree, out of the 3 of those movies, that is probably the one that shines the most.
Oh yeah.
That is
creme de la creme of this.
That is the best story of the 3. And so then you have to swing focus to 1 and 2 and say, okay, if I were to do this again, how would I do this in 3? I personally, and I'm not a writer, I'm not I'm not someone who does this by trade, but I just don't see that there's enough, if I apply my engineering mind to it and say, what is the why that I'm trying to get at with this? Well, the why is, why is Anakin, who he is and why does he end up becoming Darth Vader? That's the thing that's most important. And if I start with that and look at all the storylines that are being told, okay, I can see some things that align to that and make sense if I keep that as my center. But I think Lucas was trying to do too much. I think he was trying to do world build. I think he was trying to get a little too cute with the midichlorians. I think he was trying to get too cute with, Shmi being, kind of like the Mary figure to Anakin's, Jesus sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. You leaned a little too far into the whole, like, let's 100%. Go full on myth and let's go into religious mythology as well. Yeah.
Right.
So the thing is, I like how you're approaching it in terms of like from an engineering standpoint, because I think that's a great way to look at it. Because a lot of storytelling is, I mean, it's all problem solving, right?
Right.
And that's creativity in a nutshell. Is like there is a problem, I'm solving it, and in creativity, sometimes we don't think of it that way because it's like, well, like Kevin Smith, like I wanted to see something on the screen that I recognized from my life. Well, that's a problem. How do we solve this problem? I made the movie. That's the problem that you're solving. Like, and I think people kind of forget that, can kind of lose sight and make, creativity like this woo-woo sort of thing. And it's like, no, it's a friggin' problem solving thing. Like the problem is I don't see this thing in the world, or this thing is inside of me and I need to get it out. Well, how do I do that? I write it. I sing it. I paint it. I sculpt it, whatever. That is problem solving. And how do I do that with limited resources sometimes, or it's going to be an imperfect translation of it. How do I get it across in some way, shape, and form? Like that's problem solving. So I think that it's actually very wise, even though you're saying like you're not a writer, you don't do this for a living, but you're approaching it very much in a, in the same way. Like it is a problem. Like, how do I tell this story? And how do I tell it effectively? And the funny thing is, I think you're taking it even to a point, because I was like, as I lay my case out here in a second, like I took, sort of like George Lucas, God mode writer powers and was like, here's what I'm going to do. Like, you're actually taking it a step further and being like, hey, what if Lucas didn't tell this story whatsoever? Which is a length that I hadn't even considered going to. So that's interesting to me. So that's a bit to think about. So let me lay out my case.
Yes, please.
So my contention is really the heart of it being that there's a story there, there's a trilogy there. It's just paced incredibly poorly. Like, and I think that this is proven by, and this was a discussion more before the post-quel trilogies took hold, but there was this thing called the Machete Order, which is, or for those of us Danny Trejo fans, the Machete Order, where basically you would watch. It was a sequence of watching the original and the prequel trilogies in a way that made a little bit more sense. So basically, what you would do is you would watch, if I remember right, you would watch A New Hope, Episode 4, and then Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, and then you would watch Attack of the Clones, Episode 2, Return to the Sith, Episode 3, after Empire as kind of a flashback, and then you watch Return of the Jedi to finish the entire arc. The idea being that you're completely excising Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, from the entire thing, because as it was explained online when I read it, there's nothing in there that really happens that isn't either alluded to or explained in the other movies. So you can get away with not having to, you can not watch that movie and you're like, all right, fine. Because Darth Maul, he's dead. Qui-Gon, he's dead. And everybody else shows up and you kind of you can catch can as you go along. Now, that kind of proves that like Phantom Menace is kind of a nothing movie. So, but I believe that there are some elements of that are worth saving. And it's like, if you took those elements and you kind of massage this and change some things and then drag some of the heavy lifting that then had to be in Episode 2, because once you hit Episode 2, you're like, oh crap, we haven't done any movement of the actual story forward. We spent all this time gawking over Anakin as a young kid to build sympathy, because we know we're going to turn him into like the biggest heel in the history of the galaxy in a couple movies. So we need to be and you spent so much time just parked on frickin' Tatooine that you got nowhere. So Episode 2 had to do all of this heavy lifting, so that then by the time you got to Episode 3, it's like, oh well, we're finally here. So of course it seems better. So I really feel that there's enough story. It's just there's parts of it that could have been mined better. Like there is development that happens between Episode 1 and 2 that would have been a hell of a lot more interesting from the standpoint of Anakin's character development, kind of alluding to what you're talking about, like what does his Jedi training look like, that sort of thing. Like that's much more interesting and fundamental to who he is as a character than like, the Trade Federation. That can happen, but I mean, we don't need the whole, freaking spiel about it. So, and that's where I feel like, okay, Lucas still could have done this, but it would have been almost like someone steering him, like a Lawrence Kasdan working with him, or somebody who has the power, or someone who respects him. I mean, frig, at this point, like Joseph Campbell sitting there with him, like, hey, George, wouldn't it be much more interesting if George went, oh, maybe I should probably, okay, I guess tariffs aren't all that interesting, except now we're like, George, you kind of fracking knew things, and we wish that we didn't know those things.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's some stuff to be mined there, that then you take out a lot of stuff from Episode 1, and you kind of have that. So I really feel like in my case, like Episode 3 can stay almost as is.
Yeah. And I think we both agree on that. I think in both of our scenarios, the last movie remains as, like, I think Revenge of the Sith as it is a fine movie. It is a great movie.
Yes.
I think it's the formation of the preceding story is what I think, we may differ on. And as much as it, pains me to do this, and I'll just make, I've already kind of made my case, but I'll make this point. I don't mean to diminish or reduce the value of the Qui-Gon character, but at the end of the day, again, when you go back to the why of Anakin, Qui-Gon isn't really that consequential to Anakin. It's Obi-Wan who's consequential to Anakin.
Yeah, Qui-Gon's necessary because he's essentially the one who tells Obi-Wan, or kind of makes Obi-Wan promise that he'll train him, and for Obi-Wan to stand
who
up
almost
to Jedi
guilts
Council.
him basically into doing it. Like, if you really want to get down to it, Qui-Gon kind of guilts Obi-Wan into it. He's basically like, you need to train this kid. You need to be watching over him. And it's like, oh crap, this is now a burden I got to bear. As opposed to, Obi-Wan observing and seeing Anakin as an exceptional student and beginning to understand, like, oh crap, this kid is actually something special and we need to be doing something with this. And, I think there's a great story you can tell there, again, in that shortened format, where maybe Obi-Wan gets a little overzealous. He sees something in Anakin and wants to capitalize on it and wants to do good and do right by it. But in his ambition to do that, he fails to see the danger that exists with someone who is that powerful. And you end up over-indexing on the power aspect. And now Anakin goes from being a individual of promise to an individual of, great punishment and terror. And it's because of the fact that, in a lot of ways, Obi-Wan, fails him. And it stays all true in line to the story of the sequel trilogy, of the original trilogy, which is, Obi-Wan having regrets about, Anakin as a person and what happens to him. And so I think nothing is lost that way. So, as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, Qui-Gon in some ways is inconsequential to all this as well. I as much as I love Filoni's explanation for it, at the end of the day, you could achieve a similar end to all of this if you just focus it just on Obi-Wan. And yeah. And so I think that, at the end of the day, I think it's one of those situations where there just isn't enough story there that really demands that third movie.
Well, so here's where I differ, and this is how I'd fix it. Essentially, I would start with the fact that episode 1 is getting gutted. Like, we're opening this sucker up like a game of Operation. We're going to start yanking crap out. So I feel like first of all, we're landing in the middle of the trade war, like middle towards the end of it. We're not kind of pussyfooting around here at the beginning where, oh, there's a blockade and we need to get to a point where Obi-Wan is not Qui-Gon's Padawan. Obi-Wan is a legit Jedi Knight. Qui-Gon was his old master, but they still work together, and you have that familiarity between them. So Obi-Wan is now older than he starts out, which makes sense anyways, because when you look at the time difference between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, like, Obi-Wan has to age in dog years in order for this to actually, the math to work out, between where we get Ewan McGregor and Alec Guinness. Obi-Wan needs to be older. There needs to be a history, and you need to see that history, not necessarily in on screen, but just in the way that they interact. And you get, like, these guys have seen some shit together. But Obi-Wan is still deferential to his old master, even though technically they're kind of equals. But you can tell, like, he still respects him and will defer to him. So you start out there. You already get them with Padme in their care. And you know what? We can even start with them with the broke ass ship and the friggin' on Tatooine, if we need to go to Tatooine again, which I'm still kind of like, really? Aren't there any other fracking planets out there? But okay, fine. Put them on Tatooine, whatever. And let's start out there and then get to the pod race as quickly as possible to spot the potential for Anakin. Ditch a lot of the other stuff about him. Like you're saying, like, ditch the frickin' immaculate conception, all of that stuff. Like he is just making an orphan. Like you don't need all this other stuff. If you insist on having his mom there, fine, whatever. We can still play that out that way, but again, shorten it and not belabor this crap of like just gawking over this child. Like even make him a little bit older, which I would actually say, I think you had a great point there. I'm going to steal a bit of that. I'm not going to go quite into, mid-teens or anything, but yeah, he shouldn't be 9. He should be like 12, 13. Like even make him like a pissy, like, 13-year-old kid and have him, sassing back a little bit. Like, okay, all the parents in the audience be like, yes, I recognize this. This is no longer science fiction. This is science fact. Get that all into like the first quarter to third of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Start there and put all these jumbled pieces together and start making this kind of a weird sort of like road movie with these characters all kind of interacting and Qui-Gon seeing like there's something about this kid.
Mm-hmm.
There's something here. And even almost playing to kind of the Morpheus angle of like, I believe that, and being so willing, like make it this, prophecy. And he's kind of like even Obi-Wan referring like, oh, this crap again, we're going to start in on this. And he's like, he's the one person who's kind of that, he's really good, but he's a little wacky about this whole, like finding the one who's going to balance the Force thing.
Mm-hmm.
And however you want to work that, like almost make him, what's the, not heretic, that ain't the thing. A zealot. Make him like, like the zealot who's like kind of within the Jedi. Like there are these, you kind of get the feeling that there's these sects, like there's people who are much more like, hey, and the texts are to be alluded to as more of a, like Barbosa, they're more of a guideline, and others are like, no, this is the word of it. Cause that would actually, again, this would make sense within, the Jedi order, that it wouldn't be completely monolithic, that there would be some people who are like a little, well, this thing. So make Qui-Gon kind of more interesting than he was.
Mm-hmm.
Get Obi-Wan a little bit more on his level, but still deferential. So you don't have that student teacher thing there. It's a little bit more equal. We already get Padme in there. We get Anakin in there. We're already moving, and we still got a lot of movie left that we can play with. All right. So we spend a lot of time with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon kind of building their relationship, and you get this idea that he is like, Anakin, this kid is the one. This could be the one. We run into Darth Maul, first third of the movie, and that's where Qui-Gon gets killed by Darth Maul, who just kind of comes out of fracking nowhere. We don't get a hint of who this guy is. All of a sudden, he's there, and he just whacks Qui-Gon, and we're talking like whacks him in a way that is like, it's not a jobbing out, but Qui-Gon is so overmatched by this guy as a Jedi Knight / master that you're like, what the hell just happened? And Obi-Wan is completely flummoxed, and essentially Qui-Gon understands again, like this is not a long drawn out thing, but the philosophy behind it being, Qui-Gon understands in much the same way Obi-Wan is going to understand in Episode 4. I am so outmatched.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to. We're all, either one of us isn't going to make it, or we're all not going to make it. So Qui-Gon decides to essentially sacrifice himself for the purpose of saving Obi-Wan and Anakin. Doesn't have to be a direct guilting into it of, train the kid. Basically, Obi-Wan takes that on, understanding what his old master wanted him to do. So Qui-Gon sacrifices himself so the rest of them can get away. Now we're moving. We cut out Jar Jar. Obi-Wan doesn't even try to take on Darth Maul. And now Darth Maul becomes like this like pit bull that is chasing them.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the movie is a chase throughout all the machinations of what's going on. And now we kind of get to the point where, where am I? I lost my notes here. Sorry. So the rest of the Episode 1 starts like that whole, like, now, Obi-Wan is almost like trying to train Anakin the same way he was training Luke. Like trying to bring this stuff out. And in a way, we see him kind of failing in ways that he didn't fail with Luke. Like we see him getting angry, or something. Like we see the seed sown of like Obi-Wan's not ready to train kid. So we start seeing that dynamic in there. And then we start maybe even dragging some of that early, like the sniffs of the Clone War in there. You get to the final end here, and that's where we get Obi-Wan has to do battle with Darth Maul.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe here we get an assist with Anakin doing something that distracts Maul or something like that, or we find out that Maul is supposed to take Anakin back or something. Whatever. Obi-Wan manages to take out Maul. Like, we still kill off Maul because otherwise we're then rewriting the rest of this entire trilogy, because you have to. So we do this by some way of Anakin doing something to assist Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan needs his help, and therefore there's almost a debt that is owed. So there's this weird dynamic of Obi-Wan, like he's still a teacher, but he also knows, like, man, I would have been cut in half if it weren't for the kid. So now I owe the kid and I owe my old master. So there's guilt in like two different directions. So now Obi-Wan is conflicted, and it also gives Anakin a reason for him kind of feeling like he's got a leg up on his master going forward. Because that was always the thing. Like, how come Anakin always feels like he's just like this punk little kid who's like so much better than his master? Like, this would actually give a bit of a reason for that.
But see, I think the flaw there is I don't think it lies with Obi-Wan. I think the angst lies with the Jedi Council.
Well, eventually, yes.
I think Anakin is, because Anakin is constantly dismissed by the Jedi Council as being at the level that he thinks he is, that's what drives a lot of his ambition and a lot of his angst.
Yeah, and you can keep that. That's the thing. Like, again,
I don't think, but what I'm saying is I don't think it's an Obi-Wan thing. I don't think his issue, like, at the end of the day, his issue with Obi-Wan wasn't that he had to be better than Obi-Wan. I think it was that in Revenge of the Sith, I think he knows he made a mistake when he's on Mustafar. I think when he sees Obi-Wan, he knows he now has to reconcile what he's just done, and he doesn't want to. And so he fights Obi-Wan because of that. I don't think it's him fighting Obi-Wan because he needs to prove himself to Obi-Wan. I think he realizes in that moment, he sees Obi-Wan as his master. He realizes, I am now so far off the reservation of what I should be doing. There's no going back at this point. He's slaughtered kids. He's slaughtered Jedi. It is beyond the pale at this point.
Yeah.
So I honestly think my interpretation in Revenge of the Sith is when he sees Obi-Wan standing on the ramp of that ship, it is kind of that is the Doc Holliday reckoning right there. It is the reckoning at that point. He's like, I've now got to make an accounting for this, and he doesn't want to. And so I think in a lot of ways he's fighting himself, because he knows the fact that what he's done is wrong, but he's so far down the path now, there's no going back. So he just goes all in at that point. He's like, I need to do away with this guy.
So I almost feel like I think that you're right. I think that might be where Lucas is coming from.
Yeah.
Or where the movie itself is coming from. I think it's more interesting if he starts becoming that person who, again, the bad guy is the truest bad guy that feels like they are right. Like they are the hero. Right. And I feel like if you sow the discontent with the Jedi Council, but you keep all that, but you also sow some seeds of Obi-Wan being kind of undermined in a way as a master, whether because he had an assist from Anakin or because Obi-Wan's a little bit, he just doesn't know how to teach someone yet, and he screws up, like almost that whole parent thing. Like every parent, like we're just hoping we don't screw our kid up, too much. We know we're doing it somewhat because none of us have ever, the first time you're a parent, you're doing this for the first time. You're going to make mistakes. And then that's the sort of thing that I'm looking for there, is for that when that final turn happens, like it's almost like all of that comes back. And that's where he kind of turns and he does have that, well, I'm the hero here because you know what? The Jedi are bad. You're bad because all of this. I almost feel like that's in some ways not necessarily more powerful, but a little bit more understandable and consistent across the movies, where you kind of see this. And to me, it would actually grow that a bit more naturally, and especially like you get into that opening scene of Episode 3, which is one of the reasons why it's the best movie in the friggin' series. Is it's one of the greatest openings in any Star Wars movie. Like you're just dropped into this battle that just rages for like a quarter of the movie.
Yeah,
you just have nonstop action to start this thing. It is great, but it also then makes, if you have those seeds there of Anakin being like, yeah, well, of course I'm the shit, more so than what he already has, it kind of makes that whole sequence make a little more sense. The way that like he's because when I tried to watch a little bit of it today, I kind of like tried to scan the beginning of each movie to be like, all right, let me get a feel for these. It kind of makes his attitude there make sense a little bit more. And it almost, I maybe I'm reading into it, but it almost makes his like, oh, I'm sorry, Master, almost be a little bit more sarcastic than it is. And it feels like it sets the stage for the end of that movie a bit better. But overall, I feel like, again, like I don't feel like you have to mess with Episode 3. I feel like Episode 3 winds up being just fine the way it is. It really is like just gutting a lot of that crap out of Episode 1, and then taking a bit of Episode 2, dragging some of the setup for that had to take place in Episode 2. Like you're setting up the movie while it's already in motion because you didn't do any of that in the first movie. If you bring some of that setup into the first movie, now the second movie actually has a chance to breathe, and you can maybe get a little bit more exploration of some of the exploration of the larger issues of the Empire. Don't feel like they're sandwiched in and taking over the story, because that's the problem. Like Anakin should be kind of the A story, and in some cases it feels like he drops down to the B and the C story, because again, George has a problem not telling you everything that's going on. So he gets very into like, oh, and this whole thing going on in the Imperial Senate. It's like, that's great, George, but this whole thing is about this dude. And we've now departed from him, and now we're going into all this, and we have to then drag our head back into, oh yeah, and here's Anakin and Padme. But we were just talking about the Senate. If you give it a little bit more space to breathe, maybe you can make those things work a little bit better together, rather than be like, boom, 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 boom. It's like, what the hell just happened? So that's kind of my case. Like, I feel like there's still a 3-movie arc there. It just needs to be, some of that stuff from like in between the movies needs to happen in the actual movies, as opposed to like gawking at the kid and the Immaculate Conception and the Trade Federation meeting and all this stuff at the beginning, and farting around with them sitting there sipping whatever Gungan tea at the beginning, waiting to get gassed. And then of course the entire Jar Jar thing is like, hey, if you thought the Ewoks were annoying, here's a character that we obviously made just to put in Happy Meals. So it's like you take out a lot of that, and it's like, now we've got space for all this,
right. Well, and I think that's the other thing that we gloss over too, is the fact that, I think the playing up to the kids aspect of this is what drove a lot of stuff, and I think it's also what harmed the story. I think one of the reasons you and I are unilaterally in agreement on I'm going to say this the way I'm going to say it, but I know it leaves some room for discussion. The reason 3 is unilaterally our favorite, and we agree on it, is because that is the most, like, that's the point of the story. Like, honestly, 1 and 2 are just window dressing to it. Like, at the end of the day, we're here to see Anakin turn into Darth Vader. Bottom line. Like, that's the entire point of the prequels. Like, if no one can convince me otherwise. There is no prequels without Anakin turning.
Well, no, because it was that is George Lucas's like stated
right. So
goal.
That is the point. That is why that movie probably I mean, there's certainly elements of the movie that can change a little bit. I think some of the crap they do in the beginning with Obi-Wan and Anakin and their, some of the dialogue between them and the way they talk with Palpatine is just like, it's just Lucas at his worst. And it's one of those things that he just needs to stay away from making movies and let actual like directors and screenwriters do this and let them kind of, like as we've seen with, Andor and with Mandalorian, when you put it in the hands of people that know how to write good dialogue and good story, they can take something and turn it into something really good.
Now, hang on a second. Time out. Is this just because you got that rejection card from Lucasfilm back
Not
in
at
the
all.
day?
Not
Okay,
at
I'm
all.
just checking. Just checking. I didn't know if some of that was coming out. We need to talk to the group about this.
No, I
Oh, wait a minute. It wasn't Lucasfilm. It was LucasArts, right?
LucasArts.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to make sure I got that right.
Yes. And I say all that because I think, that I use Lord of the Rings as the comparison. I think that's the problem. When you read The Hobbit, The Hobbit is a focused story with a climax and a point to it. And I think, Peter Jackson was misguided in trying to turn it into 3 stories. And it's not. It just isn't there. And I think what we see with Star Wars is that the prequel there is not 3 stories. If you want depth in the Clone Wars, go watch the Clone Wars cartoon. That's the point of the Clone Wars. Like that series tells the detail behind the Clone Wars. That isn't going to come out in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
The point of the movies is to tell the Skywalker saga, which is about Anakin, his journey, and his turn. And I think the story can be boiled down quite simply into, here's Anakin as a person who has good intentions and is good-natured, but because of ambition, because of, X, Y, and Z that gets in his way, he goes off the reservation, he goes off path and goes and turns into the worst villain.
Mm-hmm.
And then is brought back by his son in the original trilogy. And so I think, the original trilogy doesn't get affected by it. I think it's just more how you tell that story in a very direct way. And, Gungans and pod racing and, Qui-Gon and Darth Maul and all of this. I mean, I agree with you with what you said about Darth Maul. I think the thing to do with Darth Maul, though, is you could use Darth Maul as a great storytelling device of the one person that gets away from Palpatine. Like that's the thing I wish they did with Darth Maul, is have him, have a story for him where he escapes the Sith sort of framework because he sees what Palpatine is doing. He sees Palpatine using Darth Tyrannus. He sees Palpatine using, Anakin as Darth Vader, and he moves on and in some ways disappears. He makes himself kind of scarce. He's a pit bull in the beginning, but ends up being someone who kind of disappears and plays from the shadows. And that kind of plays into the whole Crimson Dawn thing that we end up seeing in Solo. I think you can do something where you don't have to bring him back from the dead and manufacture a way for him to come back. You can do something more organic where, he doesn't get killed off. He kills Qui-Gon. He shows how the viciousness there.
Yeah.
But he's someone who is a loose thread that Palpatine hasn't, kind of cut or closed off because he's kind of disappeared. And I think that kind of plays into the mystique and the aura of that character. Like, we don't need to see him fully realized into this villain like Vader was. We could see him realized into something else in later stories. And so at the end of the day, I think that's the problem, is the prequels are all hinged on the idea of Anakin turning evil. And anything that comes before that is fine, but it's window dressing on something else. And that's, to me, I think why episode 1 feels thin and a little, at this point in my Star Wars fandom, feels a little thin to me.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying Attack of the Clones is better than it, but there's elements of it that feel more germane because we see the start of the Clone Wars, And then episode 3 makes sense where we don't have to see the Clone Wars playing out, but we see a battle happening over Coruscant. And now we see kind of the end of the Clone Wars because now Palpatine, is fully realized as the Emperor and declares, more power for himself. And so, so, I mean, I think I just, looking back on it, as much as I was a fan, I mean, you said it best when we went and saw episode 1, you're like, that was a movie about a freaking blockade. That's really what it was about. I mean, you were right. It was ridiculous. The story was about a freaking trade blockade. And it's like, that's what I went at midnight to see, is a story about a trade blockade and all the crap that comes from that. I mean, that just feels very hollow to me. Whereas I don't think we need to see Anakin as a kid. I think we just need to see him as a student, as someone who is discovered and who begins to develop a perspective of himself, as we all do. But he goes in a very bad direction because of the fact that he doesn't have the guidance that he needs to stay on track.
I will retort to this in just a moment. However, I need to gather my thoughts and empty my bladder because I didn't.
I need a pee-pee break.
I didn't have to have I need to break into my garage break. So just give me one moment.
Yes, absolutely.
A few moments later.
So getting back to what you were talking about,
yes.
I think I'm realizing that one of the things that we probably should have laid down a ground rule about was, and I never would have thought of this when we first discussed it, because I think you went way outside of the box on this, which I think is really cool. Just like, would George Lucas have been making these movies, and are we setting it in the exact same time? Because I'm thinking it much more as like, okay, if this was made again starting in 1999, George Lucas is doing it. How could you have done it with George Lucas's brain? And you're kind of coming at it from a very different standpoint, which is interesting. However, I think if I might submit to you, I've got I don't know if I got a bat in the cave or I got just a nose hair that's particularly curly today. But I would submit to you, I feel like one flaw, and you feel free to disagree on this, in your kind of relating this to the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy, is that the source material that Peter Jackson was working with, had been in place for a while, and that had been fully fleshed out and realized as a novel by Tolkien, and had really become canon for quite a long time, as opposed to like, and again, I don't know this for fact, but I don't think George Lucas had really sat down and really sketched this out in a very detailed way, because I think what was it? Was it Empire or was it Return of the Jedi? Basically, he had like a 50, or he would write an outline and then hand it off, and then Kasdan fleshes it out into an actual screenplay. And I don't know how involved George is in that or whatever. So I'm imagining he had a kind of an outline, or he had thoughts, he had notes, he had whatever, but I don't think he had like anything close to what would even be considered scripts for these, let alone a novelization of these, and like to be able to say, okay, now I'm going to adapt this into these stories. I feel like it was very much like I kind of know it. I've got it in my head canon. I've got notes. I've got or maybe an outline or whatever. There's a big difference between that, because again, like you're picking and choosing what you're going to grab then, because you haven't fully fleshed it out. And I feel like, yeah, Jackson definitely was sitting there going, okay, well, I've got this source material. Now I've got to find stuff. And you're not the guy who wrote it. You're not the guy who conceived it. So when you're coming up with stuff, it's like, it is extra special pulling it out of your butthole at that point, as opposed to George Lucas going back to him and at the time that he's writing this going, okay, George, but what happens here? Tell me what happens in between these two movies that you're telling me about, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. Oh, well, and in between here and this and this. Hey, George, don't you think that's a lot more interesting than like, an hour and a half of Trade Federation bullshit? Don't you think this is a little more interesting that we're focusing on the guy who you're saying this whole thing is about? That would be a lot more interesting to focus. Oh yeah, maybe you got a point there. I don't know. Yeah. Like you're working with the person who is creating this stuff, as opposed to kind of then interpreting it and coming up with your own. I feel like there's a lot more, again, considering the constraints I'm working under, of it's still Lucas, it's still of that time. It's almost like if you had that person there over his shoulder that he respected enough, because again, we have to look at Lucas at this point, because I think at the one of the arguments at the time for the Phantom Menace is like, well, he's making a movie for his kids. It's like, dude, he could have made a home movie and left us with Star Wars. He could have done that on his own. He's got the cash. If there was someone looking over his shoulder who he respected enough at that point where he had no constraints and everyone was just ready to let him do whatever the frack he wanted, but he would still listen to this dude. That's how I'm approaching it. I still think that your idea is really interesting. I just feel like, from I guess working within the bounds you're working with, I can totally see it. Working within the bounds that I'm working with, I think this works better. But again, and now we've worked ourselves into an apples and oranges conversation, which I really did not see happening. So kudos to us, I guess.
Indeed.
to have this showdown and to still come out with a draw. That's what I find very interesting.
Yes. But the thing I would say to challenge the angle you're coming from, which I know is kind of steeped in Lucas being involved, is...
Oh, it's not even steeped, it's dependent on it. Yeah.
It's dependent on it, but it comes back to the question of what's the why behind the trilogy. If I can be convinced that there is a strong why for 3 movies, then I'll entertain it. But up to this point, and it's not that you haven't made your argument, because your argument is steeped in Lucas being at the helm. But even with Lucas at the helm, I have to ask the question, okay, George, but why do you need the first movie? Like, what are you trying to tell other than marketing to kids? Like that's probably the why behind it. But I'm coming at it as a why for the story, for the story's sake. Like, what is the service to the story that's happening here?
Well,
and the answer is I don't think there is one.
Well, it's 3-act structure. You've got your setup, you've got your everything goes to hell, and then you got your climb out of it.
But when you look at one, his service is to the children of the time. Like, what it's for.
He totally hosed it. Correct.
Oh yeah, like one more than anything else to me out of the 3. One is totally service to children, which again I don't understand when the end game is 3. If 3 is where you're going, which is this very dark tale about this person turning to the dark side, why are you wasting any time on the I mean, I don't mean to say it this way, because I get kids are a big part of it's a family experience and so forth. But if you're going to invest that much into kids in episode 1 with the Gungans and with Jar Jar and with this and with that, and then you go and look at 3, which has literally no service to kids at all and is totally to the story of Vader becoming Vader, because you have to tell that story at some point, then why are you investing so much in the kids? Like, that's the part I don't understand.
Well,
it's like you're just doing it because you're trying to make, and I think I've answered my own question. You're doing it because you want to make money. It's not because you want to tell the story.
No, I don't.
Andor is not a story. Seasons 1 and 2 are not selling lunchboxes and thermoses and all of the crap that comes with.
Well, okay, all right. So here's where I'm with you up to a point, because the fact is, like, at a certain point, like, Disney going to make money, and if Disney didn't figure like this is affecting their bottom line in a positive way, they're going to axe this sumbitch real quick.
Sure, sure.
And rightfully so. Like,
but Disney wasn't in the picture when the prequels were made.
Well, no, but I'm saying that as an example. Like, we can't all of a sudden pretend like Disney is so altruistic and they're like wearing a bunch 100%. Of berets and like, oh no, please do this thing. We're willing.
But it begs the question:
whatever.
How did Disney allow Andor then? Because Andor's not selling a bunch of marketing crap. You know what I mean? Like, they're not selling crap to fans. It's just it's on the streaming service and fans follow it and they love it.
But if they feel like they're hanging on to fans, and if they feel like they're building towards what they're going to, and to go back to our discussion from Wednesday, like with WWE whoring themselves out for every single cent they can bring out of everything, like at a certain point, you have to make a decision. Like, you know what? Sometimes we might not be making a ton of money on this, but it's raising our prestige in this other way.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That's worthwhile in this case.
Yeah.
Because we're gaining fans. We're appealing to a certain group of fans who might be feeling like Disney is just effing us over. Well, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving you this thing that is servicing you, and not just you specifically, but it is really hitting you guys real deep. And everyone else is enjoying it too. So hey, why don't we keep doing this? In that case, it's probably money well spent for them. For Lucas, I don't think he was out to sell. I don't really feel like he was out to make money on this, because again, like he had gone how many he like when they finished the original trilogy, like he canceled any plans he had to do a sequel trilogy right afterwards, when you still had use of like Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill, and it would have like age wise made sense. Like he was just done. And
when
so
you
I get
about the marketing though around Phantom Menace, dude.
Yep.
Like there's a lot that went into go buy the Happy Meal, go buy the cup, go buy this, go buy that.
Yep.
It's about a kid, and it's about the Gungans, and it's about this and that, and pod racing, and it's just like, dude,
Well, but here's the thing. Like, I don't feel like Lucas.
That's where I disagree, because I think there was an intentionality to it. There wasn't a desire to sell.
Well,
stuff.
You're right. There's a desire to sell. The thing that I would go back to, and I'm here, I'm going to try and do right by George, because I've taken a lot of swipes at George, and the fact is, at the end of the day, like, there's no competition. I've never written
him out.
There's no competition. Like George has done way more in the writing and filmmaking world than I ever will. However, if you go back again to the Empire of Dreams documentary, when he talks about why he asked for, the merchandising rights and all that stuff for Star Wars when it first started out, his thing was like he was going to print T-shirts and movies and posters with the assumption that like the studio was going to hate the movie, and he was going to try and promote it himself. He would have the ability to go out and utilize the name and the imagery to sell the movie to the audience, because he had this idea like, I'm going to have to, like, science fiction movies don't make crap. Like in that movie, he was like, Space Odyssey 2001 was big, but most of them just didn't do that well. Like there was no big crossover sci-fi movies, a very niche thing.
Mm-hmm.
He was figuring, I'm going to have to really go out and sell this thing. Almost, I mean, probably if he was, if the thing had existed like what Kevin Smith does now, where he goes around and he does a Q&A and he puts the movie out there, like he was almost thinking like, I'll have to do this and like be walking the streets in a sandwich board to get people to go see my movie. And then like, oh shoot, they're all going anyways. And then he makes a $1 billion off of all the merchandising just because he owns it. I think in a way he was trying to sell it to people to go see it, because it was a return to Star Wars, and I feel like he really wanted to tell this story. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there and say he all of that is leveraged at getting people to go to the movie, even though, I mean, people are going to go see Star Wars, but then again, like, artsy fartsy people always feel like, oh my God, what if people hate it? That sort of thing. So I feel like, yes, I feel like he was trying to sell, but he was trying to sell the movie to people. I don't think he was necessarily thinking like, yeah, if I sell this many Happy Meals and this and that, like, I think it was all geared towards like, get people there. I still feel like the fatal flaw is in that movie, he just can't help but build the fracking world and tell you about everything that's going on. And because he's like, oh, and it's all tied into him. But at the same time, for most people, like, I'm glad that you think this is important, George, but it's almost like when they were talking about making the Blues Brothers, and John Landis was talking to Dan Aykroyd about, well, how does the car, because Dan Aykroyd had this idea of like, when they park the car, there's a deleted scene where they park the car in this room that was next to a high voltage power generator, and that's how the car got all these magic powers and this and that and the other. It was all, and not Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd had all this explanation in the script, and Landis was like, it's a magic car. It's a magic car. He's like, Dan, that's great. If you go to every theater, every showing, and explain that to everybody, then they'll all understand it. But otherwise, it's just making a magic car. It doesn't have to be explained. Just making a magic car, you know? And Lucas just can't help but tell you everything about what's going on in that universe. The same as like the separatist movement and going into like, oh, there's thousands of this. Okay, but great. But what the frack is going on with Anakin? Because that's going to be the whole point of this thing. And the crawl of the second movie starts off with like, oh, and the separatist movement's like, what about the dude who this is about? You know, he can't help himself. He just can't help himself. And again, it's the fatal flaw. It's his Achilles heel. And it's where all of this is kind of sourced to, is where like, it's the reason why Empire Strikes Back is widely regarded as the greatest of the Star Wars movies. It's also the one that he had the least to do with. He handed the movie over because he was building Lucasfilm. He was building Industrial Light and Magic, all this. He handed it over to the dude who was his film professor, who he trusted implicitly and he respected, and he wasn't going to step on his toes. And Lawrence Kasdan wrote the damn thing, and he had the least to do with it. And it turned out to be what everyone's like, oh, it's a masterpiece of Lucas. Like Lucas, like he came up with it, but he had the least to do with like on an operational scale. Because they stripped out all the unnecessary stuff that Lucas probably would like, we got to talk about this other thing about the, the way the cups were in the Imperial Senate and all that. Like, they cut out all that. And so you just wind up with the important stuff. Go figure. And then when we get to Return of the Jedi, we get Ewoks because it's like, well, we need to have, cutesy things. Again, I think it's not necessarily like a marketing thing. I don't necessarily think it's like a Spaceballs, merchandising thing, 100%. But it's like, well, we do kind of need to sell the film. I think that's where his motivation is. Like, how do I get more people to see the movie? And unfortunately, we get Jar Jar. But anyways, this has been a very interesting discussion, sir. Like, dude, you went so far out the box. Like, I need a map to get out where you are. Like, the buses don't run out there. It's kind of remarkable, dude. Like, I'm usually the person out in the edge. I'm the one hanging on the edge of the branch, and that's you this time, dude. Good on you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. It's nice to be here, a little closer to the trunk. Going, the hell's going on?
The hell?
Maybe it's the bourbon. I don't know.
It could be the bourbon, and at the time. It's only 12:30 where you're at, and
we're watching Perspectives. And drinking just the regular 101 because I'm,
slumming it, baby, slumming it.
Poverty. Anyways, so yeah, that's it. You know what? And folks, if you got a thought on this, go ahead and send that to tim@freerangeidiocy.com. He'd be glad to hear about your thoughts on this. What do you got for and another thing for this episode, sir?
I'm going to keep it simple, sir. We've been talking about Star Wars, and so I will recommend Lights and Magic on Disney Plus. All about ILM, and there is now a second season that has come out. That is 3 episodes. Serious? Yes, 3 episodes. So it is all about the prequel trilogy, speaking of which. And the special effects that went into it. So I have not watched it yet. I just know it's there, and I need to take that in. But I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen the first season, is really well done, really gets into a lot of the scrappiness of the crew at that time in terms of making the special effects for Star Wars and Empire and Return of the Jedi, and just how that just exploded into what became special effects for a lot of 1980s action movies. And so definitely check it out. It is very interesting, very well done. And I'll recommend the second season. I haven't seen it. A little snug. Haven't seen it. But do check it out. And I am sure you will not be disappointed.
So I think there's a dude in there. I cannot remember his name. But he was the guy who he did a lot of the effects work, of course, and he also was the guy who invented like the pig nose amplifier.
Okay.
But he was like the world's most interesting man in that, because like he did special effects work, he did filming, and he invented this pig nose amplifier, and he made a bunch of money off of that, and he also drove a streetcar in San Francisco for a year, and like it was like, what haven't you done, dude? Like if you'd been like, yeah, and I wrestled alligators one summer, I've been like, totally buy it. Totally. Sure. Yeah. And he could have told me like at 70, it was like last summer. Sure. Okay. I bet you did. Yeah. A bunch of interesting characters and cats in those early days of ILM. As for me, I'm going to tie this into, again, the passing of Sly Stone on June 9th of this week. I don't even know what day it is now, but I'm going to recommend the first Sly and the Family Stone album that I have. And it's kind of a cheap one, but also it's such a great bang for your buck. Sly and the Family Stone Greatest Hits, 1970. And to think that in 1970, this band already had these as hits. Want to Take You Higher, Everybody is a Star, Stand, Life, Fun, You Can Make It If You Try, Dance to the Music, Everyday People, Hot in the Summer, Hot Fun in the Summer, M'Lady, Sing a Simple Song, which is one of the friggin' greatest songs ever, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself. 12 songs in 1970 that were already massive hits. You listen to that and you get such a great perspective of, kind of a spread of Sly and the Family Stone's music. I would also recommend the Sly and the Family Stone anthology that covers, much more. You get stuff like Love City, Underdog, his later stuff. If You Want Me to Stay. I mean, just that really covers pretty much everything that I think Sly recorded, especially in the early days. But oh my gosh, what a titan of music. And just in that Greatest Hits album, there's just so much. Like every time you hit a new song, you're like, what? Is this the same band? Okay, it's the same band. All right, cool. Next song, what? So definitely check that out. Start there and then proceed outward into the greater Sly and the Family Stone discography. Especially some of the live stuff is just explosive. Oh my gosh, I can only imagine being in the room for when those shows were. It had to have been mind-blowing. But anyways, yeah, check that out at your leisure. And now, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Free Range Idiocy congregation, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening, for hanging out, and being here with us on Free Range Idiocy Friday. If you're looking for the Week in Geek, that was back on Week in Geek Wednesday. You need to get that together. You can find all of our episodes at freerangeidiocy.com. You can download them one by one, subscribe via the Podbean app. That will give you both Free Range Idiocy as well as our sister show, The Week in Geek. You can also find us on all the major podcast purveyors, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon, all the big hitters. You can also find full video on Spotify as well as our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe, like, follow, all whatever the kids say to do. I don't know. It's just do the things on YouTube that make you follow us and show up so that you can watch us. That's basically it. Whatever it takes to do that. We are on the social medias. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. We are also, of course, on the YouTubes. All of those are at Free Range Idiocy. As I said before, if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, if you have any comments on this show, go ahead and send them to Tim at freerangeidiocy.com, and he'll get back to you very shortly, if not sooner. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's about that time. It's right about that time. It's well past that time for us to shove on off to take this traveling medicine show of idiocy up the road to the next town where we will fleece the locals there, and then just dance off under
sell it, please sell it.
God. And here I'm going to hand over the show to the least idiotic of the two idiots. Granted, it's a very low bar to clear, but that is the man they call Tim. But not before I ask him the second most important question in all of human history. The first being, what is hip? The second being, what the hell did we learn this episode, sir?
We've learned the following, my friend.
Oh, goody.
We've learned that it is long overdue to have some idiots court in session. We've learned that both the idiots of this show have representative views of the Star Wars prequels, but I believe the man they call Tim is more correct.
You're wrong.
Well, fair enough. We have also learned.
Really put up a fight there. All right, fine.
It's 11:45 and you're watching Perspectives.
Oh, amateur. It's 12:45 here. We've crossed the international date line where I'm at.
It's a Tuesday for Uncle Todd. And I'm feeling every minute of it.
I thought it was Thursday. I have no idea.
And I'm forgetting if this happened on this show or if this was part of the Week in Geek show. But we've also learned that there's some movies that can bring out the emotions in family members.
That was the Week in Geek, but
that was the Week in Geek. Well, I'm going to bring it up here.
But it was funny when I told her that we were discussing this. I was like, "There's going to be some big emotions that are going to be felt for us discussing this." So it all comes together.
It does. We've also learned that the man they call Tim kicks George Lucas to the curb when it comes to the story, and Uncle Todd is a little more faithful to the man who has brought us the Star Wars stories.
Which is funny considering our previous statements on George, that we would flip that around. I know.
Hey, I'm a fan of George, but I got to call.
Oh no, you're not. He sent you that rejection letter from LucasArts.
I got to call a spade a
hell
spade.
with him.
We have also learned that the man they call Tim maybe harbors a little bit of resentment for the rejection I received 30 some odd years ago from George Lucas and his now disbanded LucasArts company.
Well, they fell apart because you didn't get hired.
Indeed.
If only you'd been working there, they'd be cooking along.
Just like we were the reason that, Google Podcast fell apart. So, anyways.
Yeah, bad example.
All that being said, we appreciate the listenership, as always. And as we close things out here on the range, be safe, be healthy, be kind, and be good to one another. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. The range is closed.
Come on.
See ya.
It's like I picked the wrong week to quit drinking.
I beg your pardon, what did you say?
Well, Johnny Tyler! Madcap!
Doc?
Where you going with that shotgun?
I didn't know you was back in town.
Damn!
You're such a disappointing pair. I prayed so hard for you. Get out. And don't come back until you've redeemed yourselves.
Oh, Johnny, I apologize. I forgot you were there. You may go now.
So say we all. So say we all.
Oh, boy.
Gotta love Uncle Corny.
Let me tell you something. The gym is going to be rough.
Oh, you betcha. The train is going to be rough. I'm going to be taking a nap on my way in tomorrow.
At least you can nap. I can't nap while I'm doing deadlifts.
You could. Just got to learn how to do the whole sleepy thing while your body is still in motion. So.
My trainer will not allow that. I'm working with my trainer tomorrow morning at 8:30. Or this morning, I should say, at 8:30.
Well, there you have
in just under 7 hours.
Well, so, I love how you're still sipping on down the medicine while I have very, very much left that behind me.
You know what? Ago. Why not at this point? I'm just, I'm almost contemplating just staying up. Just
he's going to show up to his workout and be like,
just set the controls for the center of the sun. Just what could possibly go wrong?
Well, fair enough.
Show up with a bag of gummy bears.
Show up to the gym. Show up to the gym with some chips and salsa. It's like, this is energy. It's good for what ails you.
It is. You know what else is good for what ails you?
I will take it. 110%. I gotta love it. Give it to me, Mr. Glover.
What do you see?
There it is.
I know your anger. I know your dreams. I did everything you wanna be. Oh, I am the cult of personality. Like Mussolini.
Now get the hell out of here!